The skill I checked isn't relevant here. This is a pure creative writing task. Let me write the story directly. The engine was still running. Steam curled from the exhaust into the frozen morning air, and somewhere behind a twitching curtain, a woman was already reaching for her phone. The snow had been falling since 3 in the morning, but Declan Marsh did not know this yet. He knew only that his alarm had gone off at 6:15, that his bathroom tiles were cold enough to make him wince, and that when he walked outside in his work boots and his grandfather's old canvas coat to start his truck, the world had turned itself completely white overnight. The driveway was buried under nearly 8 inches. The oak tree in his front yard wore the snow like a heavy coat across every branch, and the street beyond the low iron fence that separated his property from the sidewalk had disappeared entirely beneath an unbroken plain of white that glittered under the weak, gray light of a dawn that hadn't fully committed to arriving. He started the truck. He came back inside. He made coffee. That was the entire crime. Declan was 34 years old and had lived in the Crestwood Pines subdivision for 2 years, having bought the corner house on Whitmore Lane after his divorce was finalized, and after his company, a mid-sized HVAC contractor called Marsh Systems, had finally turned its third consecutive profitable quarter. The house was not large by the neighborhood standards, but it was well kept. He mowed the lawn on Saturdays. He shoveled his walk. He waved at the neighbors whose names he had learned and nodded at the ones he hadn't yet. He paid his HOA dues on the first of every month without a single late payment, a fact he had never once thought about until the morning the HOA came for him. Her name was Sylvia Greer. She was 51 years old, recently retired from a career in municipal permit processing, and she had served as the president of the Crestwood Pines Homeowners Association for 6 consecutive years, a tenure that had calcified, by gradual degrees, into something that looked less like community service and more like a private empire. She lived 4 houses down from Declan, in a colonial with symmetrical shutters and a flagstone path she swept personally, with a hand broom, every morning regardless of season or weather. Her husband, a mild and largely invisible man named Jeffrey, had learned years ago to exist in the margins of her attention, emerging only to carry groceries, to nod at guests, and to avoid topics she had not pre-approved for discussion. Sylvia had noticed Declan's truck on the day he moved in. She had noticed the slight rust along the rear wheel well, which she considered an aesthetic violation, and she had noticed that he left his garbage bins visible from the street for a full 16 hours following collection day, which was a technical infringement of Crestwood Pines HOA Bylaw 4.7b, and she had filed a formal notice accordingly. Declan had received the notice, read it with mild confusion, moved the bins, and never thought about it again. That was the first time. There had been others. A notice about the height of his backyard privacy fence, which Declan had inherited from the previous owners and which measured, according to Sylvia's own handheld measuring tape, 2 3/4 inches above the permitted maximum of 6 feet. A notice about his satellite dish, which faced the correct direction but was mounted, in Sylvia's reading of Bylaw 11.2, 4 inches too far left on the roofline. A notice about a delivery package that had remained on his front steps for 31 hours before he picked it up, which technically exceeded the 24-hour visible clutter window outlined in Bylaw 8.1c. Each time, Declan had complied. Each time, he had complied without argument, without appeal, and without rancor, because he was a practical man who did not enjoy conflict and who believed, with a stubbornness that his ex-wife had frequently characterized as his most infuriating quality, that most problems resolve themselves if you simply decline to escalate them. He was beginning to reconsider that belief. The morning of the blizzard, Declan had let his truck idle for 11 minutes. He knew this because his truck's remote start system logged timestamps, a feature he had never paid attention to until it became relevant. 11 minutes. The temperature outside was 9 degrees Fahrenheit. The truck had a diesel engine. Diesel engines in sub-zero temperatures required extended warm-up periods to ensure proper fuel viscosity and to prevent cylinder damage. Declan knew this not from a manual, but from 20 years of driving trucks in northern winters, the kind of knowledge that lived in the hands and not in books. Sylvia Greer's phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. The woman she called was Patrice Dumond, the HOA's secretary and Sylvia's most reliable instrument of enforcement. Patrice lived across the street from Declan and had, in the past, submitted photographic documentation on Sylvia's behalf regarding 3 separate compliance matters. She was standing at her upstairs window when Sylvia called, already watching the idling truck, already aware that this would become a matter of record. "Idling vehicle," Sylvia said without preamble. "More than 10 minutes. Bylaw 9.3a. Document the time and take a photograph." "Already have it," Patrice said. "Good. I'll have the notice drafted by noon." Declan came back outside at 6:49 to brush the snow from the windshield. He drove to his first job of the day, a furnace replacement in a commercial building downtown that was going to take his crew the better part of 8 hours, and he did not think once about his truck or his driveway or the curtains across the street. He thought about the furnace, about whether his parts delivery would arrive on time, and about whether he had remembered to pack an extra set of thermal gloves, which he had not. The notice was on his door when he returned that evening. He stood in the cold and read it under his porch light. The language was formal and dense with bylaw citations, but the substance was simple. His vehicle had been observed idling in his residential driveway for a period exceeding 10 minutes, in violation of Crestwood Pines HOA Bylaw 9.3a, which prohibited prolonged vehicle idling in residential zones in the interest of air quality and community standards. The fine was $75, payable within 14 days. A second violation within the same calendar year would result in a fine of $150. A third would trigger a formal compliance hearing before the HOA board. Declan stood there for a long moment. The snow had stopped earlier in the day and had resumed sometime in the afternoon. It was falling again now, steadily, in the lamplight, and the neighborhood was quiet the way it only ever got when it was truly cold. He folded the notice in half, put it in his coat pocket, and went inside. He did not pay the fine immediately. Not because he intended to refuse it, but because he wanted first to understand it. He sat at his kitchen table with the HOA's governing documents, which he had downloaded but never read with any care, and he found Bylaw 93A. The bylaw existed. The language was unambiguous. Idling over 10 minutes was a violation. The fine schedule was exactly as stated in the notice. He also found Bylaw 93B, which read, exemptions to idling limitations may be granted upon written application for vehicles requiring extended warm-up periods due to engine type, manufacturer specifications, or extreme weather conditions as defined by the National Weather Service. He printed this page. He highlighted the sentence. He drafted a short, clear letter explaining that his vehicle was a diesel engine truck, that the temperature on the morning in question had been 9 degrees Fahrenheit, which constituted an extreme weather condition as defined by the NWS, and that the 11-minute warm-up period was within normal operational parameters for such a vehicle under such conditions. He attached his truck's remote start log showing the exact timestamps. He put it all in an envelope and dropped it in the HOA's mail slot, which was mounted on the wall outside the community management office near the subdivision's entrance. He then paid the $75. Not because he believed he owed it, but because he wanted the payment on record and he wanted the dispute to proceed from a position of full compliance rather than defiance. He waited. 3 weeks passed. He received no response to his exemption application. He sent a follow-up letter. Certified mail. He had learned through 2 years of intermittent correspondence with the HOA that certified mail had a way of producing responses that regular mail did not. The response came 9 days later. It was signed by Sylvia Greer in her capacity as HOA president. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of his application. The second paragraph stated that the board had reviewed the application at its monthly meeting and had determined that his request did not meet the criteria for exemption because the exemption required manufacturer documentation, not owner testimony, and because the weather on the morning in question, while cold, did not rise to the threshold of a declared weather emergency. The third paragraph reiterated that his fine had been properly assessed. The fourth paragraph reminded him that any further violations would escalate per the published schedule. There was no mention of the 9-degree temperature. There was no mention of the NWS definition. There was no acknowledgement that his remote start log constituted objective evidence of anything. Declan read the letter twice. Then he set it on the table next to the HOA governing documents and the highlighted bylaw and the certified mail receipt and the copy of his original exemption application, and he looked at this small pile of paper for a while, and something shifted in him. Not anger exactly. Something more deliberate than anger. A decision. He called his neighbor, a man named Terrence Okafor, who lived 2 doors east and who worked as a paralegal. Terrence had, over the past 2 years, become the closest thing Declan had to a friend in the neighborhood, the kind of friendship built on shared driveways and borrowed tools, and an occasional beer on Declan's back porch when the evenings were long enough. Terrence had his own history with Sylvia Greer. She had once attempted to fine him for parking a rental car in his own driveway for 4 consecutive days, citing a bylaw about non-registered vehicles. A bylaw that, as Terrence had coolly pointed out in writing, applied exclusively to vehicles parked on common property and not on private driveways. Sylvia had withdrawn the notice without comment or apology. She rejected the exemption, Declan said when Terrence picked up. There was a pause. On what grounds? Manufacturer documentation. Said I needed the truck maker's specs, not my own account. That's not what the bylaw says. I know. Do you have the manufacturer's cold weather operating guidelines? They're usually in the owner's manual or on the brand's website. I can get them. Get them, Terrence said, and pull the NWS archived weather data for that morning. Official temperature readings are public record. Print everything, make copies, and this time send your response directly to every board member, not just the management office. Their names and mailing addresses are in the governing documents. If she's the only one reading your letters, she's the only one deciding. Declan spent the following Saturday doing exactly this. He found his truck manufacturer's official cold weather operation guidelines, which explicitly stated that diesel engines should idle for a minimum of 5 to 15 minutes in temperatures below 15 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure proper lubrication and prevent cold start damage. He downloaded the NWS archive temperature data for his city showing the official recorded temperature at 6:15 that morning as 8.7 degrees Fahrenheit. He assembled this into a 4-page packet with a cover letter that was courteous, factual, and meticulous in its citation of every relevant bylaw, every piece of evidence, and every procedural step he had already taken. He sent it certified mail to all 5 board members individually. 4 of them responded within 10 days. 3 said they would bring the matter to the next board meeting. 1, a retired engineer named Harold Fitch, called Declan directly. "I've read your packet," Harold said. "The exemption language in 9.3b is clear. You meet the criteria. I don't know why this wasn't resolved 3 months ago." "Neither do I," Declan said. "I'm going to move for a vote at the next meeting to dismiss the fine and grant the standing exemption. You'd have documented approval going forward for the same conditions. I appreciate that." "Don't thank me yet," Harold said. "She's going to fight it." She fought it. The board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center, a small room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting and a table at the front where the 5 board members sat in a row. Declan arrived early and sat in the 3rd row. Terrence came with him and sat beside him and said nothing, but was clearly paying close attention to everything. Sylvia sat at the center of the board table in a blazer that looked pressed enough to have been ironed that morning. She opened the meeting, moved through the consent agenda, and arrived at the fine dispute with an expression of composed authority that suggested she had already determined the outcome. Harold Fitch moved to dismiss the fine and grant the standing exemption. The motion required a second and a vote. Another board member, a woman named Clara Steff, seconded the motion. Sylvia called for discussion and then spent 11 minutes presenting an argument that was procedurally fluent and substantively hollow. She argued that granting individual exemptions based on self-reported vehicle types would open the door to widespread abuse. She argued that the NWS data, while accurate, did not constitute a declared emergency. She argued that consistency in enforcement was the foundation of community trust. Harold responded to each point with the same patient, factual precision that had made him, in Declan's estimation, the most competent person in the room. He cited the bylaw language. He cited the manufacturer specs. He cited the NWS data. He noted that Declan had submitted all required documentation and that the rejection had relied on a standard not found anywhere in the governing documents. The vote was 3-2. The fine was dismissed. The standing exemption was granted. Sylvia signed the resolution with a pen that she pressed hard enough into the paper to leave an impression on the sheet below. Declan drove home in the dark and the cold and felt, for the first time in months, something close to relief. Not victory, exactly, not satisfaction, just the quiet settling of a thing that had been unresolved and was now resolved. He did not know that Sylvia Greer was already planning something else. He did not know that she had spent the drive home composing, in her precise and organized mind, a strategy for what came next. She had lost the vote, but she had not lost the war, and in her experience, people who won small procedural battles were often too satisfied with the winning to notice the doors being quietly closed around them. She began with his fence. The fence she had flagged 2 years earlier, the one that was 2 3/4 inches too tall, had technically been granted a grace period at the time pending a compliance plan. The grace period had no specified end date in the original notice, which Declan had assumed meant it was a dormant matter. Sylvia did not share this assumption. She pulled the original file, attached a new notice citing the expiration of a reasonable compliance window, and issued a formal remediation order requiring Declan to reduce the fence height within 30 days at his own expense. He received the notice on a Thursday. He called Harold Fitch that evening. "Is the grace period documented?" Harold asked. "In the original notice, yes." "And there's no end date specified?" "None." Harold was quiet for a moment. She's reaching, but she has enough procedural cover to make it uncomfortable. Do you want to fight it or comply? Declan thought about this for longer than he expected. The fence ran the entire length of his backyard. Reducing it by 3 inches would mean pulling every post and recutting every board, or replacing the entire structure. It would cost him approximately $2,000 and 2 weekends of labor. I want to fight it, he said. Then document everything from the beginning and prepare for it to get worse before it gets better. It got worse. Over the following 6 weeks, Declan received 4 additional notices, one regarding a crack in his driveway that was allegedly a tripping hazard under the subdivision's common area liability guidelines, despite the fact that his driveway was entirely private property. One regarding the placement of a fire pit on his back patio, which he had used exactly twice and which Sylvia claimed violated a fire safety ordinance she had cross-referenced with municipal code. One regarding a motion-sensing porch light that she claimed exceeded the permitted lumen output for residential exterior lighting. And one, the most remarkable of them all, regarding the color of his front door. His front door was painted navy blue. He had painted it himself in October, a clean and classic color that he had looked at every day for 3 months without any thought beyond the basic satisfaction of a home that looked well-tended. Sylvia's notice cited HOA Bylaw 2.4, which required exterior paint colors to be drawn from the approved community palette. Navy blue, according to her documentation, was not on the palette. The approved blues were cornflower, colonial, and slate. Navy did not qualify. Declan stood at his front door and looked at it for a long time. It was a fine door. It was a good color. He had no particular attachment to it, but something about the notice, its pettiness, its exhausting precision, its transparent purpose as an instrument of harassment rather than community governance, made the door feel suddenly important in a way it had never been before. He called Terrence. "Count the notices," Terrence said. 5 in 6 weeks. That's a pattern. That's documentable. I know. There's something called selective enforcement. If she's targeting you and not other residents with the same or similar infractions, that's a basis for a formal complaint to the HOA's master insurance carrier and potentially to the state HOA oversight board. Declan had not known there was a state HOA oversight board. He spent the next 2 weeks walking the neighborhood with his phone, taking photographs. He found 7 other navy or near navy front doors on homes in Crestwood Pines. He found 4 fire pits on back patios, 3 of them clearly visible from the street. He found 11 driveways with cracks equivalent to or larger than his own. He compiled all of this into a documented complaint with photographs, addresses, and dates, and he submitted it simultaneously to the HOA board, to the master insurance carrier listed in the HOA's governing documents, and to the State Homeowners Association Dispute Resolution Office. The complaint was 41 pages long. Winter deepened around him while he worked. The temperatures dropped further. The forecasters began talking about a system moving in from the northwest, the kind of storm that only came a few times a decade, the kind with a name assigned to it before it arrived, the kind that shut down highways and knocked out power grids and turned the ordinary landscape into something that required a different set of rules entirely. The storm was called Marin. It was scheduled to arrive on a Friday. On Thursday evening, Declan checked his truck. He checked the fuel level, the tire pressure, the fluid levels. He put an extra set of thermal gloves behind the seat and added 2 emergency blankets and a bag of road salt to the truck bed. He was, by both profession and temperament, a man who prepared for things. His crew had 3 service calls already scheduled for Friday morning, all of them related to heating systems that would be under maximum stress in the coming cold. He would leave early. He would take the main roads. He would be careful. He set his alarm for 5:30. He did not yet know on that Thursday evening that Sylvia Greer's response to his 41-page complaint had arrived that afternoon in the form of an email to the full board. He did not know that her response had argued, with exhausting confidence, that his complaint was retaliatory, procedurally defective, and substantively meritless. He did not know that Harold Fitch had replied to that email within the hour, copying the board and the insurance carrier's compliance contact, stating that in his assessment, the complaint raised legitimate enforcement disparity, concerns that required independent review. He did not know that Clara Steff had replied to Harold's email saying she agreed and that she would be requesting an independent compliance audit. He did not know any of this yet. What he knew was that the storm was coming, that his truck was ready, and that the temperature was already falling towards 0. He went to bed at 10 o'clock with the quiet, settled feeling of a man who has done everything within his power and is prepared to face whatever comes next. Outside, the first bands of Marin were already beginning to push through, and the wind was starting to find the gaps in things. The alarm went off at 5:30, and Declan was already half awake, the way he always was before early calls, some animal part of him anticipating the moment before it arrived. He silenced the alarm and lay still for a few seconds, listening to the wind. It was significant. It moved against the windows in long, pressured gusts that made the glass flex slightly in its frames, and the sound it made through the eaves was not the ordinary sound of a winter morning, but something lower and more sustained, a sound with weight behind it. He got up. He made coffee. He looked out the kitchen window. The visibility was perhaps 30 feet. Beyond that, the world dissolved into a moving white.